Hey, welcome to the Lean Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Bresenden. I'm here with Lauren McLeod, who does a lot of our business development and work here at 454. We're excited to kick off the Lean Marketing Podcast with you. For those of you guys that have been participating in our Lean Marketing events, they've largely been in person with a lot of training. And we're actually trying to move the training aspect of it into the podcast format so that we can spend our time kind of as a forum or as a peer group of marketers that are learning and growing together, where you get a lot more chance to share. So this is our first kind of jump into that with both feet. And so today's topic that we're going to jump into is ABM. And so I'll let Lauren kind of take this away just because she's been charged with implementing ABM in our organization. And I thought it'd be a fun way to approach it, to have the honest conversation of how do you run ABM in an internal organization. So Lauren, take it away.
Thanks, Paul. I just wanted to start a conversation. Just hopefully it's helpful for all of you as well as we talk through where do we even start with the ABM strategy. I'm coming from your perspective as well, as I am tasked with this project to build this for 454 Creative and just other businesses for potential clients as well. So, Paul, what is the best way to start? How do we even begin building an ABM strategy?
Yeah, I love the acronyms that happen in our space. ABM stands for account-based marketing. It's funny to me that it's called account-based marketing because oftentimes an ABM project gets derailed because ABM is really about sales, not about marketing. The goal is to create a very tight interaction between what marketing does and what sales does. And when we call it ABM, unfortunately, when people learn what ABM is in terms of marketing, the sales team just sort of kicks its heels and goes, this isn't what I want to do. And so I think that's fundamentally the first start of it, is we need to understand that ABM is primarily a sales strategy, and marketing and sales have to integrate tightly in order to make that happen. And then what does ABM mean? ABM is an approach to marketing and sales that's focused on high value accounts. And so we operate primarily in B2B sales. And so ABM is a way for you to focus marketing and sales efforts in a way that you're focusing on accounts that will hopefully have a higher chance of conversion, have a larger deal size, where you can achieve network effect, meaning the more clients you get in this particular space, the more value they all find from each other. So for most B2B, the whole goal is I know people just like you, right? And the pain points that I solve for you are the same pain points that we solve for these other clients. And so your expertise and your execution is accelerated. That's kind of the goal with ABM.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, where do you feel like is the best first place to kind of look at? Like, are we looking at our target audiences? Is it best to look at customer profile?
Yeah, I mean, so ABM is if you do ABM right, the goal is you're not stabbing in the dark anymore. You have a very defined strategy of what you do. And so to me, oftentimes what happens is we go and define out target audience, right? What's the kind of company look like? Here's how many companies, here's the right job titles to look at. And it's this big, gigantic list of thousands of people that we're trying to reach. And so then what happens is marketing or sales, whoever is doing this sort of responsibility goes, oh, I'll make a sales drip. And we use Apollo or Seamless or whatever tool that's out there. And you just start attacking the space. The first step to me would be to map your space, right? And so before you do that, what I want is a decision from the organization that says, here's the total addressable market. We call that TAM. And normally when you're looking at a total addressable market, what we want is as big of an audience as possible because it communicates potential. When we're talking about ABM, I want the exact opposite. I want to tightly define our TAM so that what I can get moving is, does our TAM, does the people we target have enough saturation? Do they know who we are? And so when I look at the different growth objectives for a company, what we're trying to achieve is, have I defined the TAM tightly enough that I'm not trying to boil the ocean? I know exactly how many people I'm going to try to reach. I'm going to define specifically who I'm going to try to build a relationship with, and that's what I would call a targeted account. So you start with, this is the whole pool, or a golf analogy, right? Like I'm aiming, this is the whole green, right? This is where I'm aiming, but these are the people that I'm going after as being the hole in one.
Right.
And so I'm happy with what we land with, but what I'm really looking for is in a ABM strategy, I'm targeting an account, and I'm going to get plenty of people that tell me no. I know that that's the right organization for us. And so even though I get a no today, that doesn't mean I'm not going to get a yes, 6 months from now or a year from now or 2 years from now. And so we're going to start the conversation over, here's our expertise, here's why you're the perfect fit for what we do. Right? And this is why people like you buy from us. And this may not be a good fit today, but at some point when the opportunity comes up, would you help me get in the door? Right? If there's a website project, a redesign project, a tax credit project, or whatever that's there, when you guys are ready to have this conversation, would you help coach me into how your organization would get this across the line? And so oftentimes what we're doing, let's start with TAM. We define out specifically who we're trying to reach. And then we build a plan to make sure that we cover whatever is reasonable, right? 50%, 60% of the market in terms of getting some sort of understanding of what we do to them. So that could be email, that could be ads, that could be networking events, that could be, and once again, the more narrowly we define that, right, with great specificity, the more appropriate your tactics are going to be. It's not going to be a stab in the dark. You're going to start overlapping these tactics. They'll have gotten an email from you. They'll probably see ads. They'll see you at a trade show or some conference or a speaking event that you're doing. You know how to invite them. You look out to LinkedIn for second level connections. All of a sudden, all of those tactics have teeth because they start to overlap. And that forced marketing of all of that stuff overlapping now creates real relational connection. It's not just generic, here's some other organization that does what you do in a generic level. It's, no, we should know this team. They do exactly what we need.
Right. That's great. What are some best ways to position ourselves? You talked about email or ads or events. We always kind of talk about like doing efforts that are data driven. What is kind of the best way we can position ourselves as 454 Creative to like our TAM?
Yeah, totally. Well, if you have defined out the specific TAM, the next step would be to make sure that you get them into HubSpot. This is the totality of people that we actually need to reach out to. And so once you define your TAM, you'll start to build the TAM. You're going to define out the firmographic profile, right? What kind of company is it? What's the size? What's the income level? What's the number of employees? Whatever those sort of markers are that allows you to build your list. EOS, scaling up, all those sort of operating systems. What they're going to talk about in their annual planning is what's your secret sauce? And that includes what's your list? How have you narrowly defined it so that you can actually build your list? Once you build your list, then you'll build your persona types. Who am I going to actually reach out to? Right? So you have your list for your accounts, companies, and then you're going to have a list of people. And there's lots of tools to help you compile that, whether that's a Zoom Info, an Apollo, Seamless. There's so many tools that are out there. Pick the one that you like.
Yeah.
And then what my expectations would be is that you, whoever it is, starts defining out the playbook. And that's going to change from quarter to quarter. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick 50 or 100 targeted accounts, whatever is reasonable based upon the time that resource you have allocated. How big's your team? Who's going to be doing stuff? How big of a targeted account do you do? If you're in a bigger sales organization, you have lots of salespeople. That's why they define territories, right? They're defining their list in a smaller area so that they can each sort of boil that market in an effective way, that they don't overlap. Initially, the old way of doing sales is you didn't want to overlap. This way of doing it, I think you do want a lot of overlap. You want them to hit the organization with multiple, people in the organization, and all of that starts to coalesce into good relational conversations, not just a slap in the face sort of sales strategy. Nobody likes being sold to. So the goal here is to actually create a real, hey, we know what your problems are. We've done this a lot for a lot of people like you. We think you're the perfect fit for us. At some point when you have a need, would you be open to talking? So then you build up the playbook. What is the next reasonable set of things that I'm going to do? And what I want you to do is to pick that list. Hey, it's now 50 people. I'm going to send them an intro email. I'm going to send them a LinkedIn connection. I'm going to look for second or third level connections of stuff that we've done with people that they know. I'm going to ask for an intro from one of them. I'm going to send them some pain point messaging that says, hey, we know you guys well enough. This should hurt, and this should hurt, and this should hurt. We've
Right.
solved this before. Like, would you be open to having a conversation and seeing if this is a need for you guys right now or maybe in the near future? And then when you get a connection, you get somebody on the other end that goes, yeah, I'm willing to talk. What you're asking for is a coach. They may not be ready to buy this quarter, this month, this week.
Right.
But what you're asking for is a relationship that says, hey, when you guys are ready to take a next step, would you think of us? And would you help bring me into the organization in a way that's helpful? And so what I want the salesperson or the sales organization to do is to start mapping those accounts.
Yeah.
Who's the key decision maker? Who's going to be our coach? Is there a team that's the financial buyer that's not any one of those two? Am I being brought in because the CEO, but now I got to win over the marketing team? Or am I being brought in from the CEO and now I got to win over the CFO? You start to map through how the decisions get made in that organization. And then what we want is, hey, we got that 50. Those 50 flow down into 10 coaches. And we have a 6-month sort of average sales cycle length of when they come in. And so then you start mapping those accounts and working your way through that organization. Oftentimes what happens is, hey, we're not ready yet. But they do refer us to somebody else. That person's ready to buy. A lot of this is about buyer readiness and just being trustworthy. Am I worried? Am I relationally setting this up in an authentic way that they go, yeah, let's do this. It may not be us, but I totally trust, respect you. Like, here's somebody else you should talk to right now too.
Totally. And I want to position some of our marketing emails. I've done some in the past through HubSpot, like sales sequences. And I feel like there are some people that respond with, we're not ready yet, but maybe in the next 6 months. I want to kind of have that first position email to be more of like, let's just have a conversation, not, trying to push, like we're trying to sell something. Like, I just want a relationship rather than I'm wanting to sell you on a certain product or service.
Yeah. And I think the thing we miss often is that the sales cycle is not as much in our control as we think it is. It's not budgeted. It's not happening, right? Like, economic times are tight. They're not going to spend money just because you're nice, right? It has to have a business imperative associated with it. And oftentimes we don't get to dictate the sales imperative. So yes, but you still want sales, right? Hey, we've solved these particular pain points for you. There's some big opportunity here, right? We wouldn't be selling something that's not of great value. It may not be exactly what's on top of mind for you right now, but at some point when it is and you want to pick this apart, we can generate some good value. And so then you kind of have to help bring people across the line because you know what's broken in an organization. You've done it enough times. That's the whole definition of expertise.
Yeah. That's great. I actually was listening to that Two Bobs podcast today.
I love Two Bobs.
Yeah, they're great. But he was talking about, like, he has a new book and he was talking about like assuming the advantage player. And I feel like that kind of relates to what you're talking about, is setting up these relationships. So when the sales conversation does come around, we are the advantage player where we have the inside connection rooting for us. We are like the top person they're wanting to work with, but they're sharing more information than maybe some other potential people they're looking at. So I feel like that kind of fit in that conversation of setting ourselves up to be well connected. So when the sales conversations happen, it's an easy choice.
Yeah, exactly right. And you know what would be helpful for this conversation too is we should probably record a demo of how HubSpot does targeted accounts. They moved that functionality around a little bit. At one point, it was kind of in the menu, and now it's not in the menu. It's in the company's page in the CRM. But the prospecting dashboard is really powerful. What we're looking for is the length of the relationship. It's oftentimes these sequences will happen, and they're not engaging. And then all of a sudden, if you have this set up properly, you're going to see, hey, I did my part, and a week from now, 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, they're blowing up all of those emails and resources that you provided them originally, and now they're open to the conversation. And so that allows you to step in relationally and not be creepy. I think we talk about this often. Dating rules apply, right? Just because you have the information doesn't mean you just get to blurt it all out. You can then set up a conversation and go, hey, you were top of my list of people to call today. I don't have to say, hey, I noticed last week you were on our website and blew up. 10 of our resources that I sent you a while back. Like, what took you so long? We should
Right.
do this relationally now that we have this information, right? And that's sort of what happens in dating, right? You get this information, you see everything they post on social. You just can't say, "Hey, how's your mom? She's sick, I heard." Right?
Right.
Like, or I saw him. Like,
How was that
it's
trip to
creepy.
Italy in
Don't be
2020?
creepy, right? Like, you have to let them bring it up that they have that need, even though you know that that need exists.
Yeah.
Is this
That's really
helpful in
helpful.
terms of ABM?
Yeah. One other question I have, I don't want to backtrack too much, but we sometimes struggle with like the key verticals. Like we know we have maybe like 3 key verticals. Do you think there needs to be a different ABM strategy for each vertical? Is it like more vertical focused, or can the same
Absolutely.
strategy apply for all verticals?
No, it shouldn't apply. There are certain things that a business, like definitely your list is different, obviously. You're
Right.
reaching out to different verticals, different people. You should personalize the playbook. Even if you have the same sort of playbook, the things that you're going to say in each of those are going to be dramatically different. And so what you're highlighting are the pain points that they're going to feel, and the things that you do specifically to solve the pain points in that vertical. You can't say you do everything to everybody. That's the very definition of a generalist and not a specialist, not an expert. So yes, the things that you do may functionally look different, even if the tactics are relatively the same. Maybe you specify we do an email drip and a LinkedIn connection, those sorts of things. But the implementation of each of those is going to have a completely different flavor because you're
Yeah.
addressing that industry specific pain points. For a good example for us, we're targeting credit unions, higher ed, B2B professional services. Credit unions, it's primarily a relational buy. They want to see you at a bunch of events. They technically function a lot like nonprofits, and you have to have somebody vouch for you. So that tends to have a lot more in-person relational sort of connection where somebody vouches for you. Whereas B2B businesses, that may be more expertise driven. That's why we do podcasts and
Right.
go speak at events and are involved in business groups like EO. People go, "Oh, you solved that for that person. Like, we need the same thing." And so functionally, a lot of those tactics may shift based upon how that industry buys and how your network. The funny thing that I've been thinking a lot about with ABM, and it's this concept of network effect. I brought it up
Mm.
earlier a little bit, but that primarily relates to like SaaS companies, like software companies, as you're thinking through. And the principle is the more people I have in from this group, the greater benefit it is to the whole group. So if there's a bunch more users in, then that user data feeds a better user experience to the rest of them, where you have maybe it's benchmarks or intelligence or a bunch of other stuff that you get to resource, and now it grows. Well, network effect typically happens by integrations, not by feature development. And I think about that very clearly as it relates to sales, right? Like oftentimes if we get the courage to say, there's a fractional CFO company that I'm aware of, and they got a construction client up in Alaska. They're in Southern California. And they got
Mm.
one, and then they referred him to another one that was in Alaska. And all of a sudden, this guy's got 5 or 10 different construction companies that are all in Alaska in the same space because the network effect
Right.
happens. We forget that that's actually what's happening to us in sales
Right.
because we don't overlap the relationships, especially with a sales relationship, we're primarily trying to gauge risk. Can they do what I need them to do? And so the more we can overlap and create this network effect in our sales strategy, the faster our sales cycle goes. The quicker and easier that sales process goes. They don't need a bunch of referral phone calls and all this other stuff. They know that their biggest competitor is also using them. They want that expertise that's going to apply
Right.
to them too. And it's just an easier relationship. I know they can do it. I've seen them do it. This other company that I know, trust, and respect is also using them. It just goes. So I
Yeah.
want that to be part of the thing that drives courage with us and with our own clients of like, get really courageous and narrow your scope on TAM. You can always expand it later, but make
Mm-hmm.
enough focus with your sales strategy so that those things overlap.
Totally. That's great. How important do you feel like the kind of tailored messaging pieces are with the ABM strategy, with what you're doing in emails or phone calls or any other kind of like marketing efforts that you're tying to your ABM strategy and your playbook?
Yeah, there's 2 parts to this question, I'm assuming. Number one, if you're targeting different verticals, that it should be very specific, right? Like the person that's getting it should feel like I wrote it to them. It shouldn't feel like an automated
Mm.
email. It shouldn't feel like a sales email. I hate the emails where it's clear that they scraped our website, picked one client off and say, here's this,
Yeah.
or the sales emails where they're pointing at this video like, hey, I'm looking at your website right now. Who cares?
Yeah.
That instantly tells me you're not interested in a relationship. You just want to sell something.
Yeah.
We're trying to add back in a human element, but what you've done is you've just alienated me. You don't actually know me well enough to do some homework. You're using a tool to sort of scrape and to introduce it. Like, have a reasonable conversation. If you went to the same school or you went to, second level connections, instead of just saying, hey, Tom too, right? Have Tom call me, or have Tom send us an email and go, hey, Tom, or hey, Paul, I wanted to introduce you to Lauren, right? Like, have that sort of relational connection where you're leaning on that social obligation. One of the things that I try to list out when we build a playbook, a playbook is a feature in HubSpot that says, here are the exact steps of what you should be gathering from the call. And so when they kick off a playbook on a call, it's, tell me about your company, what's your company size. Give me enough things there that feel more relational, where it walks the person through a script essentially, but not a script in a read these set of words in order. It's like, here are the things that you should be looking for, right? And so some of that would be an upfront contract. Hey, you're the exact person that we built our company for. Would you help me out and help me understand where you guys are at in this process? If there are any pain points, I'm not trying to sell you. What I want is just some clarity. Like, if we can help now, great. If this isn't a good fit, just tell me no. No is my second favorite answer. What I don't want to leave with is you being really polite and then, yeah, sure, send me a proposal. You don't really want a proposal. You're trying to be nice. And I'm going to go off and spend 30 hours of work trying to build all this stuff out. And then what ends up happening is I get, free access to voicemail for the rest of my life because you were just too polite to say no. What I really want is just a no. That's the upfront contract. Would you just tell me no if it's a no? Perfectly fine. We'll be friends. I'll buy you a drink at the next whatever SEC UA event. Right. And so that's kind of what that piece would be. And you probably want to build that in a playbook. Here's our intro call playbook. I'm going to set an upfront contract. I'm going to figure out a little bit more about their organization and see if they might be a good fit. I'm going to say, do you guys have an existing vendor that you're happy with, right? And if that ever changes, would you give me a call? I'd love to get connected, right? Yeah. That's probably your intro call.
Yeah.
You probably want a playbook that then walks through, okay, how do I set up a LinkedIn invite? How do I invite them to some resources that we've built that I know are not just generic lead magnet sort of resources. They're things that will actually help and show our expertise. Because you're always going to dribble some free candy in order to show them that you know how to solve their pain points. So how do I give them enough of that value so that they go, yeah, that's great. It could be as simple as inviting them to a charity golf tournament you guys are sponsoring, or it could be enough to say, hey, we have these learning events. Would you like to participate? Or subscribe to this podcast, right? All of those things are things where you're dribbling in out expertise.
Yeah.
So that would be another playbook. But yeah, don't write a script that's just a generic script. Don't automate things in marketing because they're easy to automate. Oftentimes what I tell our organizations are like, this, do it manually 10 times, 20 times so that you understand what you can automate. And oftentimes it's not even automating anything, it's templatizing. Here's a template I start with. Here are the things that I customize so that it feels real. Don't make it feel too clean in marketing. Make it feel human. That's better. Introduce typos, emojis, contractions. Go make it shorter. When I look at automation or AI driven content, oftentimes it's so wordy, so overly verbose that you look at it and you go, oh, a real person never wrote that. I'm not reading that. If you weren't going to write it, if you weren't going to read it, why should I?
Right. That's really helpful. What are some best ways to identify pain points for our TAM? So I know we've talked about maybe for our company doing some sort of research or survey to figure out what those pain points are. Are there other strategies that would be the most helpful besides, setting up those conversations with those key people in our verticals, or doing some kind of survey? What are some other ways to figure out what those pain points are so we can really kind of hit the nail on the head of what we're driving here?
Yeah. I mean, that's probably a podcast in and of itself. I'll give you the short answer. As if you are really an expert in the field, you know what pain points you're solving. The challenge is that and I find myself in this space often, you're doing it so often that you lose the context of what really hurts. Because That's one of the things that I've had to kill in my vocabulary as an expert. I used to always say, oh yeah, that's easy. We could totally do that for you. It's not easy. If it was easy, they would have already solved it themselves. And I don't want to
Right.
minimize their pain by saying, oh, this is an easy commodity. I'm really good at it because I spent years figuring this out. Now, if you minimize that and say, oh yeah, that's easy, it's hard to charge an expert practitioner to do that work for you. Now it becomes
Yeah.
a commodity. I don't want to slip into being a commodity.
Right.
So over time, you lose that sort of acute pain. You mentioned two Bobs. This is one of the best pieces of advice that I got from that podcast is, like, oftentimes what you're looking for in a sales meeting is to have somebody that's just there paying attention to the client. Where do the eyes light up? Where do they all of a sudden get really animated and go, oh, that's exactly what we need. That's it. We tend to gloss over those things because we've done them so often that we forget that that's their actual pain point. And so then we go down the road building a solution that's tied to a better solution that then evolves into a different solution. And we start pitching these things, or at least I do. I start pitching these things in a language that may not resonate with the person that's actually buying.
Right.
That may be the right solution, but I'm 5 steps ahead of them. And so oftentimes what you're trying to come back to is this the right pain point to solve? That to me is the first step in the conversation, is brand messaging that's tied to validation. And so you validate it with your customer set. How do you validate it? Well, you can do that with a survey. It's one of the things that we talked about internally. You can do that by having people sit in on the sales conversations and go, is this what you want? Right? We've built this product for someone exactly like you. Does this make sense? Tell me why you wouldn't buy. And then once you've had 10 or 15 of those conversations, they go, yep, that's exactly what I need. Now you start locking in that values, your value propositions, that pain point messaging, and you go, these are the things that they need to understand about us in order to buy. Right? Yeah. We're focused specifically on their pain points. We know what they need. We have products that can solve them. We have a guarantee that helps eliminate the risk and kind of solves that. The pricing structure is well within what they're willing to pay for it because we understand the value of what we're selling relative to the problem that we're solving. All of those things are things that you have to understand, validate, and condense into a quicker package.
Yeah, that's great.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. What are some best ways to kind of maintain those longer term relationships with some of these target accounts? So people that might not be ready now, and they, what's the best way to maintain those relationships over time? That's not an annoying way of like, hey, are you guys ready yet? In an email. So what are some others, maybe strategies within that?
Yeah, that's why customer journey is such an important part. When we talked about sales being aligned with marketing, this is one of those really critical moments where understanding that buyer's journey becomes super important, right? Like, I'll just quickly run through this. Like at the top end of the funnel, what you're looking to do is to dribble out enough expertise, enough proof, we've done this problem before, that they go, hey, when we're ready to pull the trigger, I know who to call. And so you want to stay top of mind in that sort of process. And so it's probably less frequent, but regular communication. Once a month sounds appropriate, right? And you're looking for touch points to go, hey, I've touched all of these key accounts at least once a month. That could be a phone call. That could be a LinkedIn connection. That could be tagging them in a post. That could be inviting them to a conference that you're going to be at and scheduling time to grab drinks. The more human you can make that, the more regular that is. And then as you flow down into the customer journey, this goes from being an MQL into an SQL. This now, like, hey, we have identified that they actually have a need based upon their buyer behavior. Maybe they raised their hand and said, yeah, let's talk. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they blew up your product page for a particular product 12 times last week. Well, it's not them probably doing it. They're forwarding it around to their team, and you now have attribution set off of some of the things that you've sent. And now you get to see that start to blow up, and you can reach out and start that conversation. Yeah. When it gets further down in the conversation, the touch points become a lot more they become a lot more frequent. So now instead of it being a regular sort of cadence, now it's a real focused drip. Hey, let's book a call. Let's see if there's time to actually do this. Do you want to schedule a demo? Here's our pricing sheet. And so you start looking at like workflows, these sort of like drips that happen all at once, as opposed to a monthly even cadence. And so you're looking at, hey, let's book some time to talk, those sorts of things. There's no hard and fast rule. When I see what kind of, if the value of what you're providing in those emails is very generic and let's say suspect, less is more, right?
Yeah.
Don't annoy people. If you can sense that they have a particular pain point that needs to be solved, most B2B businesses are what are called considered purchase. Their buying cycle is really short. You may have been talking to them for a year or two, but when they're ready to buy, they're finding 3 vendors and they're moving. And so if you miss that buyer window because you're not aware of that, all of that work is wasted.
Totally.
And so that's where having some visibility and being in a marketing automation tool like HubSpot is very, very beneficial, is you can see the blow up of their research. And oftentimes we're blind to that person's customer journey until they raise their hand. We have people that jump straight from, I didn't know who you were, you're a visitor, you were browsing our website, to I'm having a sales form. And you go, oh yeah, our sales cycle is, 30 days. And you're like, no, it's not. That person's been sitting on that idea for 6 months, slowly doing research. And even when most organizations don't have an MQL stage. They don't have these lead magnets that say, hey, we're the right fit. We might be interested, but we're not ready today. They don't have this sort of build-up content. I think of like buyer's guides, pricing guides, how to do annual plan, like all of these sorts of things. If you're a credit union, how do I fix my credit score? What do I need to do for 2 years out if I'm planning on buying a house? All these sorts of resources that you should be giving to them. And then measuring, like, who's downloading this? How does this help?
Right.
How do I structure that conversation so they are ready to buy? They go, okay, here's my next step. The more you inject yourself in that expertise conversation, the more they're going to view you as an expert in the sales process, and the faster it's going to go.
Yeah, that's great. What are some really reasonable and achievable like KPIs we can set for our ABM strategy if it's successful or not? Is that conversations booked? Sometimes it's more that relationship aspect, which isn't as measurable. What are maybe some key measurable tactics?
Oh yeah, I think it's all measurable. So you're going to have an onboarding, right? You're going to have this sort of like measurable one. Did we build out the strategy? Did we define our TAM? Did we look over our list? Do we feel like our list is small enough? Once again, more two Bobs, but David C. Baker has some really good guidance on this. You should be looking at between 200 and 10,000 sort of contacts, organizations, depending on the size of your organization and depending on how many competitors are in that same space. So you should be able to narrow your list enough to go, hey, over the course of the next year, can I provide 50, 80% coverage to this entire group? Mm-hmm. How do I make sure that these people know and see me? And so then you're looking at, there's just this like, if I've defined the strategy right, then the next stage of it, how do I define the metrics of whether my team is doing it or not? It depends on how much of that market coverage you already have. Are you known? So part of this is you saying, okay, this quarter, I'm going to map 50 accounts. And my goal is every week I'm going to put in 10 of those accounts. I'm going to identify who the decision maker is. I'm going to try to get a coach. Right? And so the KPI would look at and say, did we map those 50 accounts? Did we run through the playbook for all 50 accounts? And the playbook is conditional, right? I'm going to try to schedule an intro phone call, whether they allow me to actually schedule that call or not. I'm going to leave them a voicemail or something, but I want to define first meeting. I'm going to send them a LinkedIn connection. I'm going to do the first stage of that playbook to everybody in those 50. And then I'm going to measure through how many of them took the next step. Over time, what you're going to end up building is your conversion ratios from prospecting to SQL, and you're going to know how many you should set in your target accounts to reach your revenue goals. But that's one of those things. Don't define your KPIs for ABM like, oh, we have 10 accounts. Some of that is random. You don't know where people are in the buying cycle. What you can control are your activities. Did I map all 50? Right? And then did I find a coach? Did I agree to these? Did I walk through those processes with them? And then did I get maybe it's, hey, I need 10 phone calls. I need 10 intro phone calls. And if it's 10 intro phone calls and the salesperson doesn't meet their revenue goal, you look at all of those other leading KPIs and you go, hey, you did your part. It didn't materialize.
Right.
But if they didn't hit their revenue goal and they didn't hit any of those initial KPIs of you doing your prospecting plan, now we have a problem. Right. Let's take the other side of it. Let's say I hit my revenue goal, but I didn't hit my prospecting goals. I guarantee you the organization is still giving you a high five. Right?
Yeah.
So this is sort of those things that you do to build up to make sure that you hit your revenue goal. But if you're hitting your revenue goal, go focus your time and energy somewhere else, right? Let's say you start building out the longer term plan to start nurturing some deals, right? Double down on some of those other activities so that the longer term revenue goals are starting to be hit.
Yeah, that's great. Super helpful.
Okay, I think we're at time. It's been a lot. Hopefully this is a good intro, and we'll also send over a demo on how prospecting and targeted accounts work in HubSpot.
Sweet.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks so much, Paul.